Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. As you know, AI is now generating integration logic, drafting tests, and even executing workflows. That raises a bigger question. Is integration simply getting faster or fundamentally changing? So, today we're going to be discussing this and more with our amazing group of panelists from Bison Transport, Cognizant, and AWS. So, before we jump in, I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves. Hal, do you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, Hallsson. I'm working for Bison Transport as a principal enterprise architect. I've been in architecture for over 23 years in different capacities in different industries. I'm very, very looking forward to this discussion.
Wonderful. Mukta?
Thank you. Lovely to be here. I'm Mukta. I look after the government and regulatory business sector in the banking and financial services for Cognizant. I'm a client partner with them. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Shri?
Hey, a very good morning from beautiful San Francisco. It is a pleasure to be here with SnapLogic, with Bison Transport, and of course Cognizant. We're all partners, and my name is Sri Raghavan. I'm responsible for what's called enterprise strategy with our tech partnerships team. So I've been in data and analytics for about 25 years, and my responsibility is to work with all these partners in terms of integrating their solutions into the AWS technology stack.
Fantastic. And I'm Molly Matthews. I'm a part of the team here at SnapLogic. I've been a part of technology teams for the last several decades, and I'm so excited to dive into our topic today. So let's start with a lightning round. In one sentence, and Shri, we'll start with you. What has changed the most in integration over the last 18 months?
From my standpoint, what I'm seeing with our customers is a fundamental change. Of course, code has gotten faster, but the true transformation to me lies in us moving from rigid, manually coded, and maintained connections to adaptive AI orchestrated networks that can handle complex, unstructured, and as you can easily imagine, rapidly changing data environments. This is what I see as a fundamental change.
And how about from your perspective? What have you seen changing?
There's a lot been changing in the last 18 months, and it's hard to answer this question without referring to AI. AI has been very, very integral in our integration journey. And really, what I'm seeing, the two biggest changes are how we connect to our data versus point-to-point connections from applications, and/or the emphasis on how this is driving out a further focus on business architecture to look at business processes.
Fantastic. I know, Mukta, obviously you have the opportunity to work with many different partners in your role and the teams that you lead. I'm sure you're seeing change nonstop. So I would love to hear from your perspective.
So, see, for us as Cognizant, we sit literally between the world of Shri and the world of Hal. I think we sit alongside you somewhere, SnapLogic, Molly. So, what we have seen is AI has actually changed everything for better or for worse. Clients want everything. They want agility, they want speed, they want scale, they want quality, along with strategy, along with the fact that it has to be a future proof way of working with the right quality and compliance. So, for us, the world's literally rattled. So, our world is rattled completely.
And I think, AI it is the topic of our time, right? And it's changing so frequently. It's funny even saying 18 months out loud, it feels like the wrong time frame to talk about. And Shri, I'd love to hear from the AWS perspective, you know, often leading on this topic and talking about co-pilots and all of the different ways that AWS is leaning in to support so many of us around this. How do you feel like integration development in and just this concept of AI co-pilots is helping or hurting, maybe from your perspective, to just help the integration landscape?
Yeah, let me first agree with Mukta's point. Our worlds are rattled, right? In a lot of good ways, though, I will say, and that's the spirit in which I think Mukta also made that point. But I also think there's quite a bit of uncertainty, right? Simply because there's a Cambrian explosion of tools today. Copilot is just one of the tools, right? And albeit a very important tool. To me, copilots, AI copilots, are revolutionizing integration development by transforming, I think somewhere I read, manual code intensive tasks into what I call conversational automated processes. And I think some statistic that I heard a while back saying 88% of developers reporting improved productivity. Now, statistics are neither here nor there, but the consistent number that I've heard is over 75%. Now, AI copilots excel at speeding up repetitive tasks enormously. But to your point, there is also a current limitation by their inability to fully handle highly complex or undocumented legacy systems without strict human oversight. So, from that standpoint, there's a long way to go as far as AI copilots are concerned. And we've done some enormous work at AWS, for instance. We've got this thing called AWS Kiro. It's an agentic AI powered integrated development environment. And what it does is to it transitions developers from prototyping to actually production using spec-driven development. So I don't want to go too much into technical details, but I will for a quick second. It's based on something called VS Code Fork. But the idea is that you are now able to use natural language prompts with what's called Amazon Bedrock, which is our AI service, into structured technical specification requirements like designs and to generate, test, and deploy code. So AI copilots have come a long way. They've matured significantly and continuing to mature, but for repetitive tasks, they're fantastic. But for complex environments, we're still working towards that quote unquote holy grail.
What we find on like the floor level here on our side is that it's a lot about, I mean, technology is great, it's available. We use that and we have it as an added function to enhance your workday, if you will. The problem we are seeing right now is that it's lacking in education, meaning that how do you train people to use these tools, and how can you use them effectively? So there's a certain amount of resilience on jumping into that space. So we'll have to continue to educate the differences between Copilot versus a business process that's AI enabled, that you may or may not see in the background. So I think education is very, very key here.
I love that you brought that up, Hal. I was actually just reading an article this morning about this very topic, about how so much focus has gone into the systems, the integrations, the actual workflows, but the change management, right? And really bringing people along on the journey, kind of like winning the hearts and minds of the people, right? Who are going to have to be working inside of these systems and changing is really kind of the next frontier of AI, so to speak. And so I think that's such a fantastic point. And especially, and I love, the perspective that you bring from Bison Transport, is AI is now disrupting legacy systems or things we don't think about necessarily as disruptable. But transportation, healthcare, like all of these, different businesses that are so primed to be lightly modernized, but are still serving the same human capital, right? The same people. So I love that perspective. And Mukta, I would just love to hear, you guys so often are standing in that gap, right? Between the business outcomes that you're hired to accomplish, but you are having to really do those implementations and ensure, that these things are done in a way that is bringing people along on the journey. So maybe just talk a little bit about that from the Cognizant perspective.
See, overall from Cognizance and the area that I look after, Molly, and I'm sure Shri and Hal would agree, financial services are very cautious when it comes to adopting and adapting to the AI world. And working with regulators and the government clients, of course, it becomes even more difficult. But what we've seen as service integrators, our biggest impact has largely been in the build area, which, as Shri rightly said, repeatable task. So with testing and documentation, they are following closely behind, because these are the parts of the life cycle where we have been deployed for to work for the client. And these are the areas where we think that AI can most easily accelerate the engineering tasks. And this is where we see as service integrators, where we can actually get maximum measurable gains and very clear measurable gains. Code generation, maybe refactoring of it, code explanation, maybe migration for that matter, boilerplate, and also developer assistance. But very important to note, as Sri had rightly said earlier as well, these are the repeatable ones. They're not bringing in thought leadership here along with the AI or the different ways of working here. And that is where Cognizant's own metrics that we publish. So our CEO has stated that about 30% of our code across the client base is done by AI with the help of AI. And we work very closely with hyperscalers as AWS, Google, and Microsoft. EY also ran apparently, I was reading about some survey, cross-industry survey from EY, that also pointed first to software development as the largest impact in the areas. But we now looking at the wave that's coming up, I believe the next wave from Cognizant or any service integrator would be the test generation, quality engineering acceleration, and documentation support. So I was reading IBM reports. They said that their internal time savings have been about 59% on code documentation, about roughly the same on code explanation, about close to a 40 on both code generation and test case generation. But yes, there are. I mean, to be honest, there is definitely adoption, slow adoption as well, which is design and production scale rollouts. We all know that AI sometimes coming to production can often fail. So of course, we've seen a bit of a slower adoption there because we believe enterprise value is constrained actually, and it's driven more by trust, governance, and the ability to operationalize AI very safely. So this is how we have started looking at this area now.
There was a word that popped out for me in that I'd love us to dig into, and how I would love everyone to kind of share with me the perspective that you bring to this. And the word was governance, because I think, again, this is another hot topic when it comes both to integration. You're plumbing data in from a bunch of different places. You're giving access to different teams, often in our world, around the world, right? How do you view, Hal, at Bison, the access that you're giving, the governance that you're wrapping around, having system access, all over the place, but really when it comes to this concept of AI, what is Bison's view around governance?
Governance is, you're right, absolutely important. And this is something that we focused on quite heavily. So just to put some context here, we are modernizing now our 20-year plus legacy systems that are comprised of about 200 plus applications. So we decided to implement a brand new integration platform that is event driven. This, in effect, actually forced us to, not to say that we didn't have governance before on the old systems, but it actually forced us to rethink what governance looks like. And what we found is that implementing those technologies and the vendors we have right now to serve that platform, they often bring the best practices to us. We can then adjust them to the way of how we work, and that's been very, very, very successful. And you're right, when we talk about access to information systems all over the place, sometimes that's very ungoverned. And in our case, what we did was to create master data stores and operational data stores to consolidate that information, to take back control of the access to that data. So nobody has direct access to the master data anymore, but the integration layer and subsequently AI. One other thing I want to mention is that the development time that we've now have on through our new processes, new governance, and new integration layer is a lot less than it used to be. And we are using effectively AI-enabled tools to reduce that engagement as well. So all around good story, and we've reaped the benefits from that with reusability and also a low-code, no-code environment, which has really, really helped us in launching new projects that used to take 2 years before, now take maybe months. So it's a very eye-opening experience.
That's amazing. And Shri, what about from the AWS perspective? When you think of governance, obviously, this is very core to how AWS approaches many, many things. But I would love to hear this perspective specifically when you think about agents and their ability to act, autonomously. How do you view that?
Hey, before I dive into the question, two things I want to say. One is, when I work with a spectacular panel like this, there are so many important points that are being mentioned. Two in particular. One is about enablement.
Mm,
I'll mention. The other thing is about the larger issue of governance from the standpoint of things like foreign entities. We work a lot with European countries. We work a lot with Asia Pacific, so things like GDPR is extremely important, as well as HIPAA, things that Mukta mentioned as well. But we don't have time to go into. But specifically to your and by the way, so happy that Mukta mentioned AWS first before the others. Absolutely very important. I think I made.
You didn't pay her, did you?
No, of course I heard. Of course, I'm so happy I made my money for today. But anyway, in terms of governance, for us, we believe that governance must evolve from reactive, human in the loop oversight, which is historically what it has been at, to more proactive, agent-centric orchestration. What I mean by that is you are now seeing a plethora of agents. When I say plethora, I think it's a tremendous understatement to the actual numbers of agents we're seeing. I was talking to a large financial services company out of Switzerland yesterday, and one of the things that we're saying was they are actually putting into production hundreds of agents this year, and significantly going to expand for a variety of tasks from the sublime to the ridiculous. Now, to manage all of these autonomous agents that operate at high speeds across disparate systems is not easy. And that's where traditional governance, as important as it is, falls short a little bit. It tracks users, but agentic governance must actually treat autonomous entities as what's been called as digital labor, assigning them unique identities,
Mm.
clear boundaries, zones of intent, and continuous runtime monitoring. So from that standpoint, there is going to be a bit of a transition, and the transition is actually going to be quite cataclysmic in nature, which is a good thing, although the way I use a word, has all kinds of unseemly implications. But that's not the point. The point is now it has to be a lot more proactive. It has to be a lot more agentic centric, and there's got to be more serious human in the loop oversight, I believe, and we believe here at AWS, for the vast number of agents that are going to be in production.
So I think if I have to draw an analogy here, Molly, Hal, and Sri, it would be this governance would be what traffic rules are for driving. So it's not the car, it's the system that ensures that you're driving safely and the right manner. So it can be an autonomous car, it can be a sports car, it can be a normal car, it can be your Marutis in India or the Kias here, or you can have Mercedes or whatever that is. I think it's the traffic signals, the rules, everything that brings this, I would say, method to the madness of AI. I think I can draw that parallel very easily there.
I'd just like to add to this discussion a little bit around agentic governance. So agent governance is one thing where you're using maybe one agent here and there. Agentic, meaning that you have multiple agents working on something, it requires very, very, very careful design and orchestration and oversight. So, I mean, my point, at least for our enterprise, is that we will not be using just totally autonomous agents from day one. We will not. There will always be human in the loop, and we will continue to involve that. But there is this misconception on just, install the AI and we'll all be better off for it. But that's not the way it goes. So, it's fundamental for us to install and complete what I'd consider to be the horizontal layer that kind of drives everything else. And that's the governance, that's the security. Just to mention that, a lot of companies' vulnerabilities are through APIs. And agentic use of API is therefore not just turn on, but it has to follow the whole process. Right? Just an example. So we see this as an ongoing thing. However, it's a lot faster than a lot of modern technologies that we've seen in the past, such as the internet, etc. So how do we mix match between just click install, and away you go, and generally and maybe take a more of a cautious approach to this. So build the foundation first, and then we'll look at what we can enable AI-wise in our industry. There's a lot of opportunities for that, by the way. But cautiously, just wanted to point that out. But governance absolutely first.
Yeah.
I think
Oh, go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Mike.
Thank you. I was just saying about there are a few questions I always carry with me as a checklist when we're talking about AI to our clients, whether we are taking from our hyperscalers or building it ones internally. And I think a lot of it draws from both I've heard from Hal and Mrs. Sri. One is who's allowed to use that AI. you cannot just democratize it and say, you know what, free to use for whatever you want. Next is, what data are you actually trying to feed into the AI, the agent, or the process? Then, of course, how do you prevent leakage of sensitive information? You have classified data, the sensitive information. How do you put that guardrail or the traffic system there? And then the human in the loop, of course, checks for biasness and for accuracy and quality and this, that, and the other. But the most important question that sounds very transactional sometimes, very tactical sometimes, is who is responsible when something goes wrong?
Right.
Very, very important.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
that definitely has an impact, Mukta. So, I mean, we're a federally regulated industry, so we do have guidelines around what we can and cannot do with our data, or if it has to stay within our borders, etc. So, I mean, we're very careful with that. But absolutely turns the point on and a highlight on the fact that how secure is that data, and when you turn that over to an automatic process, although being half automatic, what's the observability on that, and what's the risk to the organization when we do something like that? I mean, we cannot just implement technology for the sake of speed. We have to be very pragmatic about it, and sometimes regulations are absolutely something we need to put first, because it has a deep impact if it goes wrong.
Sure. I actually think it's easier at times when you are in a regulated industry, right? It's where you have some of those boundaries that you can build around into. I think it gets really interesting. I mean, that's a kind word, interesting. More difficult, right? When you aren't in necessarily an industry where there are tight regulations. So you think non-finance, non-healthcare, non-transportation, that is where you are beginning to have to develop those rules and regulations for your own industry or company. Shri,
I'll,
sorry, you're going to say something.
no, you make all of you make an excellent point in this regard, right? But I'll tell you, one of the things that sometimes we've noticed is a bit of an overreach, in the sense that yes, these are highly regulated industries, and yes, there's a lot of risk if things were to go wrong. So the natural reflexive reaction sometimes is to shut off all access and essentially say, "Hey, I'm not going to take any risks
Right.
because it's my job, and therefore I'm really not in a position to be able to actually open even a tiny bit of the floodgate." Now, that's where here at AWS, what we do is, just like, of course, Bison Transport and Cognizant as well, we move from no access as a reflexive option to saying, hey, let's provide least privileges one step at a time, to essentially then saying, take that least privilege to a just-in-time intervention. So essentially what it means is that for certain kinds of high-risk industries or high-risk tasks where, data breaches are extremely sensitive, we say, let's provide the access and let's provide the certain kinds of privileges, but also make sure human in the loop is there. And that's a fancy way of saying just in time, just so that if things were to go awry, there is someone there who's actually going to be able to take action to make sure that first of all, you are doing the right thing by the business by providing access, but at the same time taking the right kinds of precautions to ensure that things don't go bad.
Yeah. I think this leads me into a topic that I was hoping we would get to cover today, which is talent. And I know that sounds a little separated from some of the things that we've talked about: integration, governance, AI, co-pilots. But in reality, this is the question I hear all of the time. Obviously, I come from a leadership, background, CEO, president, etc. Everybody wants to know, how is this topic disrupting or changing the game when it comes to hiring and talent? So, Hal, I'd love to start with you. How does the integration space, how AI is disrupting the workplace, how does it change or augment how you prioritize capability in hiring today?
For our integration specifically and on our data side, we find, at least in Canada, that those talents are very scarce. And to find somebody in that space is not easy. So training internal people on how to use the newer technologies that is not necessarily hands-on keyboards, but more click and drag, has become the focus here. So, and that, in that you can actually retrain a developer on to be an integration specialist. So that has definitely changed that. And AI has a huge role in that, by the way. So, although I want to point out that, there is a fear out there from a talent pool perspective that, oh, well, we're going to be replaced by an AI after a couple of months here. That's just not true. There's still a lot of need for workers that are skilled in various levels, but the more need we have is more around people who know how to use AI, and that's what we're very, very curious about, and how we can attract talent pool like that, because it is going to be impacting all levels of our operations, from maintenance to warehousing to anything else. So that's the big piece we're looking at.
Great. Mukta, same question for you.
I think I'll pick on a few points that Hal and Sri made earlier. And then we discussed that AI literally is taking over the build work, the test work, all the repeatable tasks, perhaps. So what we as a service integrator and service provider, we start looking at is the role for us, the role now becomes less about tool operation and more about human judgment. So that we always call human in the loop in any area. So the capabilities that we prioritize today are primarily the business understanding. So you have to have domain knowledge in depth, architectural thinking. So we look for engineers with a very, very with proficient in certain technologies, data and process understanding, very, very important, how they collaborate with each other in terms of system integration, as we say. See, we're not saying that we do not value technical strength, we do. But what really has stood out for us is the ability to align all of the tech stack that we have with our clients with the business outcomes to make them more reliable, secure, scalable for the AI. But internally, as Hal said, I would repeat what he said. We are also building our talent internally. So we have our coding events and we work alongside our clients. We have licenses. We work very closely, as I said earlier, with all the hyperscalers. So we have access to their sandboxes. We have access to our client sandboxes and we continue to develop. So it's like literally learning on the job. So we continue to upskill our people on the use of AI, ethical use of AI, and then continue to build on top of what our service providers, our tool providers have to offer. So this is how we're looking at hiring. But primarily, to answer your question in one simple short sentences, we're focusing more on the domain expertise, the thought leadership, than just the technical capability now. There's a huge shift.
Yeah. Shri, what about you? What about from the AWS perspective? Has anything shifted in how you're hiring?
Tremendously. I think, first of all, it's very important to underscore the point that AI is not here to replace people. It's
Yes.
it's a very it seems very cliched in a lot of ways, but it's absolutely important for us to disabuse people of the notion that you are going to lose your job to AI. It's unthinkable for a number of reasons. First of all, it's actually pretty insulting to say that all the years of business acumen that you've developed can suddenly be replaced with this code generation tool, for lack of a better word. It's impossible. It can't be done, right? So to Mukta's point, what we're looking for is, I was talking to one of the VPs of engineering here last week, and one thing she said was, we're looking for strategists, sorry, an architect and a
Yeah,
strategist put together.
combined. Yeah.
What they do is, AI certainly acts as a builder, the integration professional, it generates code for you and all that. But you need someone who ensures that automated disparate AI outputs and APIs function together to create this cohesive, secure, and most importantly, business aligned workflows. And this is where both the points that Hal and Mukta made in terms of being very cognizant, pardon the pun, by the way, of the business and understanding the business processes, understanding the use cases. Ultimately, it's never about that particular tool because, as you know, again, tools change. I've used so many tools 6 months ago that I hardly even touch today, simply because, things have changed. But the business logic hasn't changed. The use cases hasn't changed. Our ability to be able to bring together different tools and strategically think about how we're going to address these use cases in the long term, that is fundamental. And that's exactly what it is we're hiring for. We don't test for code because, you can even I can code, which is appallingly bad. But nonetheless, those are some of those things that we're looking for, and our perspective has changed from that standpoint.
Yeah, I love it. I've noticed, and I think this is just a shift that's been actually coming for quite some time, is I have such value, tremendous value. And it's not just in our engineering teams, but it's really across all business system teams for strategic thinking, systems thinking, people who are collaborative, who are curious, right? And I think, we are now seeing that leak into our engineering teams, which I personally think is an exciting time to be in engineering, where you no longer are just put against a set of problems and a keyboard. Like you are now, having the freedom and being challenged to think across multiple problem sets, and you are being an advisor into business outcomes in a different way than I think you were 5 and 10 years ago, which I think, if that's inspiring to you, I think it's a great time to be in engineering. All right, so just before we close, I have one kind of final lightning round. This has been so fun, such a wonderful conversation, and great deep insights from each of you. So this is difficult because I feel like AI has transformed daily, like weekly for sure, but daily, kind of how we all think about what it is that we do in integration. But if I can ask, when you think 3 years ahead, if you were to just put into one sentence, if you can, and you think 3 years ahead, what will define a world class integration team in 3 years? So, Shri, I'm going to start with you.
I was hoping I'd go last, but nonetheless. Um, 3 years, 2029. Of course, the caveat is that things have changed so much in the last 3 weeks. So 3 years is a bit of a long time to predict. But if I turn out to be right, then I'm buying all kinds of lottery tickets. For us in 3 years, we believe a world-class AI integration team will be defined not merely by technical expertise, as we've talked about, but by its ability to orchestrate what I call human agent learning at scale. They will be moving beyond experimenting in chatbots to deploying autonomous domain-specific AI agents as digital co-workers, and that's a very important point. It's not about these agents replacing you, but they'll be digital co-workers with the focus of I would imagine, about 80 to 90% of process redesign and about 20% technology implementation. That's what I see in the looking glass 3 years from now.
Great. Hal, what about you?
I'm inspired what you said, Sri. There, it's definitely something that I can see. So I echo that. In 3 years, it's going to be hard to kind of imagine what that would look like. But maybe I'll venture on here and say, here's what I see. So when we've all we've been doing in the last little while is to disconnect business from IT. That's been a long-standing problem. So to me, it's about building capabilities for the business to do what they do best. So we'll provide through these technologies, advancements, agents, etc., the ability for the business to quickly turn around an idea into an actionable item. And basically, I'm not saying just click a button and it's there, but providing the capabilities to do so very fast. In order to do that, you need to understand the whole business process and how that works. And IT needs to kind of toe the line on trying to get up with the business process and not focus on the technology. So, and that's what I see. I see a tremendous opportunity through AI to make that happen. And maybe I'm biased here, but I see everybody as an architect. Everybody contributes to architecture. So I think that's going to be something I would like to see in 3 years.
Amazing. All right, Mukta, you're going to bring us home.
So I was thinking when I heard Hal and Shri, I was like, okay, they've stolen the answer from me. So let me see what I can do differently. Let me try and use the world as my canvas and then tell you maybe I'll try to be a bit more radical. So picking on what Shri and Hal said, yes, maybe 3 years from now, I can see Cognizant proposing their teams as maybe 60% digital workforce and 40 in human form. I may still have the job till then. But then the second part of what I was thinking as they were talking is that maybe there will also be a situation, a state where my client's portfolio will also be not a product portfolio, maybe an AI portfolio, AI products. Maybe they're managing AI products. So maybe that world will also change 3 years from now. Who knows? Anthropic has already disrupted a lot of thinking, and they've gotten a lot of people worried. So maybe who knows where will we be 3 years? But I think this is how the world looks like to me, in my weird imagination.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I think the one thing we know to be true is change is constant, and we are all just leaning in and trying to be the best change agents we can possibly be. So thank you guys all for joining us. AI, we have heard from all three of these wonderful experts, isn't removing the role, it is simply reshaping it. And how organizations respond to that shift will determine how effectively intelligence scales across the enterprise. Thank you so much. We hope that you enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you,
It was
Molly.
awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
Alan.
you, Molly. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mukta. Thank you, Hal.
Thanks.